welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. We're powered by CLNS Media. Today, it is a Saturday afternoon here, right around 3 o'clock Pacific time. On July 1st, it is free agency's first day in the NBA. We've had quite a flurry of signings, but it doesn't seem as crazy as last year. Or maybe that's just because we haven't had the perilously bad decisions that we had right at midnight last year this season. To talk about this, I've brought back on Dieter Kurtenbach. Like Dieter has been saying, he has the time and he's happy to come on, I guess. So what's going on, Dieter?
Not much, Tim. We talk all the time, even off record. So it's not as if this is really any different than our day-to-day.
Yeah, really. We're just like doing what we typically do, just over the internet for everyone to listen to, so we have to like censor ourselves
a little bit,
like 5% as opposed
5%.
Yeah, like
this is just a little less drunk and a little bit different than Barney's Beatery in West Hollywood.
This is true, man. I might drop by Barney's later. That's a good idea. Dieter, let's talk about this Paul George trade before we get into free agency decisions. When I first saw that trade, it is Paul George straight up for Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis. I honestly was just in shock. Like, I could not believe that nobody could beat that deal. I could not believe that Kevin Pritchard agreed to that deal. I could not believe that that is all Paul George fetched in a trade. I just couldn't really comprehend exactly how this ended up being the best that Paul George could get. So what is your reaction to, what ended up going down in this Paul George saga?
I have 5 bullet points, Sam. I have a lot of thoughts on this. First off, I absolutely agree with you. What is, I believe, my first response, and then what the hell, and then we escalated from there. Ultimately, I think that Sam Presti did fleece Kevin Pritchard in this deal, though. Just as I'm glad that we're doing this. So immediately after this went down, or not, maybe within an hour or so, I contacted you. And it's like, either I'm doing something, we got to talk about this. Like right now, I got some very raw thoughts for this. And you're like, let's wait until the dust settles a little bit. And I'm glad that we did that. Not because it changes anything, but it brings more clarity to the argument for me. And the biggest one is essentially, I don't know what Danny Ainge, the GM of the Boston Celtics, was thinking. But he was definitely asleep at the wheel for this one. There's a lot of different ways that we can sort of parse that together. I don't disagree with any of the reports that have come out. What I do disagree with is sort of the revisionist history that, and I'll say it outright, that Danny Ainge is clearly trying to perpetuate through some pretty obvious reporters that use him as sources. And this notion that Boston had a much better offer and that Kevin Pritchard just decided that he wanted to trade Paul George to the Western Conference so that he was out of the East is totally preposterous to me. I think that it's not necessarily untrue that Danny Ainge offered 3 draft picks, but Danny Ainge has so many draft picks that really the separation between that Nets pick or the next 2, and the one that they got for Fultz, and some of the ones that are going to end up being in the 20s. That's a massive gap. And when you say, okay, maybe Boston's best offer, and it would have had to have been in principle because they were waiting until Gordon Hayward would sign with them or not. If their best offer was like Jay Crowder, Marcus Smart, or Avery Bradley, both of which are pending free agents, and 3 picks that conservatively are, they're certainly not lottery picks, but they're conservatively in the 20s. I get Oladipo and Sabonis. I get it. It's not a great deal, but that's, I think, honestly better than what Danny Ainge has supposedly thrown out there. And that's the joke to me. Danny Ainge has to throw in one of these highly valued assets that he had, which is the 2018 Nets pick or the pick that he picked up for Fultz. Just one of those, and it beats this deal. He throws in just Jaylen Brown or just Jason Tatum. And
there's no way he threw in either of those.
No, and you throw in just Terry Rozier, and I think you have a better deal than this. I mean, the fact that he refused to sweeten it in any way because it's in the revision in the stance of the Celtics. Well, he's a 1-year rental. Yeah, maybe. But what the hell are you doing for the next year? Or you want to try to compete for a championship, or you want to sit there and hope that these assets work out? Danny Ainge has now sat through Jimmy Butler going for 50 cents on the dollar, if we're being nice. He has sat on the sidelines as Paul George has gotten traded for a $20 million player who is not even worth close to $20 million in Victor Oladipo, and Sabonis, who is conservatively a top 10 pick in last year's draft and is a nice player, but isn't going to change the state of your franchise. And no draft picks. He sat through both of those. Danny Ainge had the arsenal to not even have to worry about Gordon Hayward. He could have traded for both Jimmy Butler and Paul George this offseason with the assets that he had and still probably kept a couple of first-round picks in play. It's laughable to me how this is going. I understand playing the long game, but when they're having a goddamn fire sale and you've been stockpiling assets, that's the time you sell your assets. You are selling high. And it is laughable to me that the Celtics fans and Danny Ainge, through his proxies, are trying to sell this as prudency. Meanwhile, I don't know what the hell Kevin Pritchard's trying to do.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Celtics here for a second, because boy, do I disagree with you.
Fine, that's fine.
Boy, do I disagree with you on Boston. So there's no circumstance where that 2018 Nets pick should be on the table, and there's no circumstance where this 2018 Lakers, 2019 Kings pick should be on the table here. Okay. 7 to 9 years of those high-level draft picks that end up being top 5 level picks essentially, which is what I think these can be conservatively estimated as.
That's fair.
Those are so much more valuable than 1 year of Paul George. You have to consider it based on asset control, and you have to consider it based on everything else. And you also have to consider it by, I'm not even sure that Paul George and Gordon Hayward get them over the top in the East.
I disagree with that, and I'll keep this short to this.
Well, I think that they get them to a chance.
I think you have a much better chance. I think that's a 60-win team with those two. And I'm looking at Cleveland, who wants to trade Iman Shumpert, their only good defensive player other than LeBron, and maybe Tristan Thompson if we're having a nice day. I see Cleveland getting worse this offseason. They don't have a general manager. They can't sign anybody, and they're trying to dump salary to get out from a tax bill. They're going to be worse next year in the regular season. Boston could theoretically get pretty significantly better. And I don't know what that means in a 7-game series between the two of them in the playoffs, but damn it, at least give it a shot.
Yeah, I understand giving it a shot, but I don't think they're favored. I don't think they're favored over Cleveland right now. If they end up with Gordon Hayward and Paul George, I do not think that they are favored over Cleveland. I think they certainly have a chance to beat Cleveland in that scenario, but I don't think they're favored over them either. If they could have done that, if they could have accomplished that goal reasonably, I would have been all for that. I would have totally understood going for it and not using your number of assets.
The Houston Rockets are in no way favored to beat the Golden State Warriors next year.
Sure. But they don't have the future assets that Boston does that positions them going forward as the preeminent threat in the East or in their conference.
Theoretically, it's all theoretical. Boston continues to move the line back. Well, we'll do it in 2019. We'll do it in 2020. And Danny Ainge keeps buying time. It's a friggin' Ponzi scheme where he is just constantly pushing it back. I totally understand that these assets are extremely valuable. I love Jaylen Brown. I don't think he's going to be a superstar. He might be a fringe all-star in the Eastern Conference. Hell, he might be an all-star next year.
But here's the thing.
Jason Tatum, but this is the time, and the notion that Paul George is a guaranteed one-year rental, I think, is foolhardy. Get in and win and convince Paul George to stay, and now you not only have a great present, but a bright future on top of that, because I don't think you had to give up either of those two highly valuable assets to get him, but you had to give up more than what it seems Danny Ainge was willing to do, and to not be able to split the difference between the two of that is just cowardly, in my opinion.
Okay, so here's the other part of this. I would not have given up either of those two high picks. I think that Memphis pick is actually a really valuable asset for Boston, and I would have been willing to throw that in. Who knows if Danny Ainge did. I agree with you generally that I don't really buy into a lot of the reporting of, what was on the table, what wasn't on the table. That just happens way too often with Boston.
On draft night, we have every reporter in the damn country talking about every, ridiculous concept known to man. We're just before the free agency crazy. We're in the middle of, 60 players joining new teams. That if Danny Ainge had offered something massive, we would have known about it then. So Danny Ainge coming out afterwards and going to his buddies and saying, well, we offered 3, this and that. That's nice. That's covering your ass after you got egg on your face.
Yeah, I think that I don't even know that there's egg on his face, so I don't really know that I agree with that. But what I will say is that what it kind of comes down to for me is that if I was Indiana, I would have rather had Jay Crowder and Marcus Smart than what they got.
Yeah, I can absolutely buy that.
I think
that's a different conversation than the one I'm having. But let's talk about that, because I'm not. You know my stance on Marcus Smart, and we've talked about that Jay Crowder contract being awesome.
Yeah,
I totally get it. If we're just saying apples to apples, maybe Marcus Smart, Jay Crowder's better than Sabonis and VO without a draft pick.
So Jay Crowder has 3 years, $21 million left on his deal. Victor Oladipo is going to be making $21 million for each of the next 4 years.
Victor Oladipo made more than Paul George last year.
And Jay Crowder is better than Victor Oladipo. He's just a better basketball player.
No right-minded person disagrees with that. I'm not high on Smart. I would have asked for Avery Bradley with his pedigree and Jay Crowder, and now we got a ball game.
Well, do we think that, would you rather have Marcus Smart or would you rather have Domantas Sabonis? I think it's clear.
I think I would rather have Sabonis.
Oh, I would not even come close to that. I'm not positive that Sabonis is anything more than a third or fourth big. With Marcus, Marcus is a starter. That he.
My Marcus Smart slander knows no bounds.
But that he is at least a high-end defender who can at least create off the dribble for others and who can, occasionally knock down shots. He's very streaky, but realistically not really a shooter. To me, it's just kind of crazy, right? It is bananas to me that I cannot envision a scenario where that offer was not on the table for Boston, right? I can't imagine Jay Crowder and Marcus Smart.
I think that we saw it, though. I mean, that's my point. There's almost no way that Boston could have fucked this up, and yet it seems as if they did. And so what are we going to just put this on Kevin Pritchard? Because if Kevin
yes, that's what I'm doing. I think that this is an irrational decision.
I have a very hard time believing if it is, and I'm not saying it's impossible, if Kevin Pritchard was hell-bent on getting Paul George out of his conference, for whatever the hell reason.
I think it's a misevaluation. I don't think it's even the craziness of we need to get this guy out of our conference. We need to, I want to screw over Paul George by putting him somewhere he doesn't want to go. I don't even think it's that. I think
he doesn't know what the hell he's doing with player evaluation.
I think it's genuinely just a misevaluation of what Victor Oladipo is and what Domantas Sabonis is. I would have rather had D'Angelo Russell and Timofey Mozgov for Paul George. There's no circumstance where that was not on the table, given the fact that they traded him for a late first-round pick in Brook Lopez, right? That had to have been offered at some point, given the fact that it was a trade in what was essentially a salary dump deal at one point.
Right. I have one question for you here. How much of this, and I can't shake this from my head, how much of this do you think has to do with Victor Oladipo having played his college ball at the University of Indiana?
I think that certainly plays something of a role.
How screwed up is that?
But when your team's going to be shitty, I understand it. You want to make sure that fans stay in the seats. There's going to be something of an Indiana bounce there from graduates who want to see Victor Oladipo in Pacers yellow, I guess.
Yeah.
I understand it from that perspective. The problem is, really I don't. I would not do that. But I understand why that would be a factor at the very least.
Only in Indiana does that work, by the way. I mean, Charlotte. You remember when Charlotte tried that by getting a bunch of North Carolina guys? That worked out great.
Only in Indiana do I think that this is a potentially valuable thing. So, Victor Oladipo, I'm not convinced I would rather have Victor Oladipo than Marcus Smart, by the way. I'm just going to flat out say that, too.
Conversation. Have your Victor Oladipo slander knows no bounds. My Marcus Smart slander.
I think he's fine. I think Oladipo is a starting level shooting guard, but in the end, I think he's a net negative asset too. At the same time,
I agree with that. I mean, he is just nowhere near what anyone thought he could be, and they've changed the expectations on what Victor Oladipo is going to be 9 times now.
Well, he's getting paid as a top. I don't care what the expectations are really. I care what he's getting paid and what his actual production is, right? Like, he's getting paid as a, borderline top 10 shooting guard in the NBA, right? That doesn't really have a whole lot in the way of positional versatility because he's not a point guard, and you still need positional size next to him on the wing because he's only 6'4", right? So,
absolutely.
I'm not a fan of his game whenever you're rebuilding. Like, I think he probably averages 20 points per game next year, and people get real excited about him again.
Hyper inefficient, though.
But it's going to be super inefficient. Yeah, like, he's a guy that last year was 1.6% under the league average true shooting percentage. He's never had a true shooting percentage over 53.4%. Last year, his PER was 13.6. I could continue to go on and on and on and on.
And he's not doing anything for you defensively like everyone thought he would be, this lockdown wing defender. He's not even close.
He's like an average level defender to me too, right? Yeah. Like he's not a killer defender, but he's
no. Like you don't mind him being on the court, but he's nowhere near the expectation of what he was supposed to be. Where he was supposed to be this tenacious, floor slapping Avery Bradley type, and he's not that.
Right.
And this is my question. If I'm Indiana, and again, we're operating as if both parties here know what the hell they're doing. And I think it's fairly clear that neither Boston or Indiana really had a full grasp.
Oh, I think Boston knows exactly what it's doing for what it's worth.
I vehemently disagree with their plan.
Like, so I don't think that you can argue that they don't know what they're doing. That is an incredibly intelligent front office. But I think that you can make an argument that what they're doing is wrong. Again, I don't.
But
I don't agree with that argument either. I think that what they're doing is fine, depending on what the offers were on the table. And to be honest, I can't see a circumstance where their offers don't trump what this Victor Oladipo-Sabonis offer is.
I can't. I'm just not going to give Danny Ainge the benefit of the doubt on that because he hasn't proven to be the guy. I just
let me put it this way.
Boston wouldn't have done it.
I might rather have Jay Crowder alone than this package for Paul George.
No, just because there's upside with Sabonis. And if we're talking, yes, there is, and you know that. Like, listen, if we're just talking Oladipo and Crowder, it's a no-brainer to me. You take Crowder.
So what does Domantas Sabonis do on the basketball floor that, like, makes you intensely interested in him? Because he's a center.
I just saw those flashes at the beginning of last year. He faded hard. I don't know if he's anything more than a nice seventh man, but he does have upside. He does have upside. And I wouldn't be totally shocked if he turns into an average NBA starter, and that's something of value.
So, again, like, this is what I will ask. Like, what does he do right now that says he can get to the point of being an average level starter? He's 6'10". He's a center athletically.
Yeah.
He doesn't have long arms. He's not a rim protector. He doesn't get into passing lanes. He's strong enough to at least stand guys up on the block. He's mobile enough to defend on the perimeter a little bit. That's valuable. Yeah. That's rotation valuable, though. It's not difference-making valuable defensively.
He starts knocking down some threes.
Right.
I mean, so, like, a nice pick-and-pop guy.
So, like, you need him to be a pick-and-pop guy. You need him to be a legit three-point shooting pick-and-pop guy because the other issue here is that he shot 44% in two-point range this year, but he's 6'10" with a 6'10" wingspan that, without, like, super bouncy athleticism, he has great touch, but I don't think he's ever going to be like this crazy finisher at the rim either. So I look at him.
I'm not purporting him to be, but I just think that a nice pick-and-pop guy, as this league spaces out more and more, has a lot of value. And I don't think that he's ever – again, I'm not trying to say that he's maybe going to be more than a rotation guy, but I think he could be he's a nice piece to have on a team. You get something for now, you get something for later.
Right. And so what you're saying, though, is
I would have rather have had draft picks, but I don't know. I mean, what kind of a draft pick is Sabonis worth right now? If another team had come to the Thunder and said, we will give you a draft pick, what range would that draft pick, what is the upper range of the draft pick that could have been to where you would have thought that's an even deal?
Okay, so I would have had Domantas Sabonis at I'm trying to think where I would have had him on my board this year.
This year, yeah.
Yeah, so like just to like kind of gain some sort of...
Like 25?
Maybe a little bit higher than that. Maybe 20. So let's call it...
How is that any different than one of those Celtics picks that they were offering, essentially?
Because for instance, that Memphis pick that is realistically like...
That could have a lot. That could have a big-time upside. I get
right,
that, but
like...
Is that any different than Boston's pick?
No, like if they were just offering Boston picks, which I doubt they were, like maybe they were, I don't know, but like if they're just offering Boston picks, then sure, I get that. But if they're offering that Memphis pick for me is a better asset than Domantas Sabonis. If they're offering, they have a Clippers pick, right? The Clippers pick is probably like around.
That's the right level.
Yeah.
That feels about right.
Right.
Okay.
So you're getting.
So they're offering three of those.
That would mean right. So that would mean that you're essentially valuing.
They offered three of those.
No, I think that if they offered one, they should have accepted the deal from Boston.
Correct. So you're saying, and
I think they should have accepted the deal from Boston just if it was Jay Crowder and salary filler. Like
so if we're just going to keep cutting it down to where it's like literally Jay Crowder alone would have been a better deal to certain things. If Kevin Pritchard if the full Celtics offer that they threatened was out, or they said was out there after the fact, was actually out there, and Kevin Pritchard didn't turn it down, he needed to be fired yesterday.
Yeah, I mean,
it's gross dereliction of duty, there's no one who could defend him on that. So
I don't think he should be fired, but I do think that it's an indefensible decision for this to be the package for Paul George.
Yeah, it's so indefensible that I cannot legitimately wrap my mind around Kevin Pritchard, who has, made some good deals.
Kevin Pritchard was genuinely a good general manager in Portland.
Exactly. Somebody who has a nice, solid track record and deserves the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give it to him, and I'm going to say that Danny Ainge was asleep at the wheel on this one because he refused to even. As soon as this is Danny Ainge's reputation in circles. As soon as the conversation even gets to Jaylen Brown, he's like, end of conversation. Because he's so concerned about sending out misinformation to everybody and never being known what his next move is going to be, that I think he totally screwed himself out of what would have been a total coup of a deal.
Again, though, I will say Jaylen Brown to me has more value for 7 years than Paul George has for 1.
Right, and if I'm a Celtics fan, though, I'm livid that they're punting this next year.